Dr. Ocasio-Cortez has a well-rounded point to make about the COVID-19 crisis on Twitter. She tweets, "Want to know one of the major reasons why South Korea has had a stellar rapid response and quickly produced scaled up to 10K tests a day? They have single-payer, Medicare for all system. We don't. Please remember why it's so important to fight for health care as a human right." Since so many seem to take AOC seriously and act as if she's not an elaborate experiment in performance art that is crazily spun out of control, let's take a look at her claim. It's one of our favorite things to do here. Of course, you send us your annoying claim on social media, and we get antisocial. Attempting to highlight single-payer healthcare as a solution to the coronavirus situation is one of the 4 worst points ever made. At no point in this tweet does she come even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone with the internet is now dumber for having read it. I award her no points, and may God have mercy on her soul. Let's start at the beginning. Where did COVID-19 come from? The left and the media have done a lot of work trying to intimidate people into silence about the country where it originated. In fact, I'll probably get canceled for mentioning it, so I'll allow some of my esteemed colleagues to lay it out for you.
The Wuhan coronavirus has now surpassed the 2003 SARS outbreak.
The first U.S. case of Chinese coronavirus was confirmed at one of her hospitals.
Inside that building is the world's first lab-grown copy of the Wuhan coronavirus outside mainland China.
The Chinese coronavirus death toll has jumped to at least 26 people.
The death toll from the Wuhan coronavirus spiked today.
The Chinese virus, the coronavirus that is worrying the whole world.
This comes as the Chinese coronavirus death toll has jumped to at least 26 people and sickened at least 835 people.
Got that? I heard a lot of racism there. I'm a little intimidated. Where did this come from? China. Guess who has single-payer health care? China. Technically, they have a single-payer system, but do allow for small private industry as well, which makes their communist government-provided healthcare system slightly more free market than the one AOC has actually proposed. Of course, despite the claims of xenophobia or racism, literally no one on planet Earth blames the Chinese people for the virus. That would be insane. Or most doctors, they don't blame them either. The Chinese government is another story. When the virus was actually discovered, the government censored the information and punished the doctor who found it. More than 3 weeks before it was publicly disclosed, he told other doctors to be careful and try to avoid infection in a group chat. Quote, 4 days later, he was summoned by the Public Security Bureau, where he was told to sign a letter. In the letter, he was accused of making false comments that had severely disturbed the social order. So warm, that government. A couple of months later, the virus was raging through China, and the doctor was dead, reportedly from infection of COVID-19. Or a bullet to the head when no one was looking. One of the two, I'm not sure exactly. When you have a healthcare system controlled by the government controls the healthcare system. And when you have a bad guy running the place, or just kind of have a large list of terrible priorities implemented from above, the state winds up being protected at all costs. The reason you are going to be able to watch Netflix 12 hours a day for the next 2 months is because of government healthcare. Who hid the virus? Because the government was embarrassed in China. Now, I'd assume if AOC could form any words after that second bottle of wine, she would probably slur something like, "Oh, you can't use China, they're bad. Bad version of socialism. Me no like." Good talky talk, Alexandria. First, I can't believe you actually called them the Chinese government. Racist. How dare you identify where they come from? What's next? Are you going to call them a foreign government? Or are you going to tell me that they're Asian? How dare you? But I'll grant you that China is a uniquely evil place. So, who has had the worst experience with COVID-19 outside of China? Italy. Guess who has single-payer healthcare? Italy. Italy's healthcare system has been completely overrun by COVID-19 to the point that they've basically had to turn the country off. No one can go in, no one can travel, only grocery stores and banks remain open. They're treating people in hallways. They can't find enough respirators. And according to the New York Times, quote, the gap between resources and the enormous influx of patients forced the doctors to decide not to intubate some very old patients, essentially leaving them to die. We're talking about a country that is basically treating coronavirus patients in bouncy houses or bouncy hospitals. But this realization is that the Italian healthcare system and that, that it's so inadequate is actually kind of new, especially for the left and the media. It wasn't too long ago. You could find fawning op-eds about the brilliance of the Italian healthcare system written by American doctors. We used to have, what can Italy teach the rest of the world about health? And now we have, Italy's healthcare system groans under coronavirus, a warning to the world. From teacher to warning in such a short time. Tragic. Of course, part of this is just AOC becoming a victim to her own circular version of logic. She's able to pick up the puzzle pieces, but she can't always figure out how to put them together, For example, we all know the coronavirus problem is just at the beginning here in the United States, but this has been a giant problem all over the rest of the world. So how does that work with this constant AOC talking point?
I blame us. I blame this body. Because every single developed country in the world guarantees healthcare as a right except us, except the United States, because we can't get it together.
You almost feel bad for her. I mean, it's weird how almost all other countries have universal healthcare, but almost all of them have had massive problems with COVID-19. But I can't wait to catch up to the rest of the world on that one. It's going to be exciting. Let's get to the specific country, however. She mentioned in her tweet, South Korea. Have they done a better job at testing than we have? Yeah, pretty much. Honestly, not too long ago, South Korea was testing at a rate of 3,692 people per million. The U.S. was testing at 5 per million. Not 500, but 5. Our rates are improving dramatically now, but South Korea has been testing at a rate 738 times ours, and that's what experts call suboptimal. But when faced with a fact such as this, one approach for AOC to consider in the future would be asking why that is. Why are our rates so low? The development of our test got caught up in all sorts of bureaucracy. You see, while we don't have a single payer system in the United States, many aspects of the CDC operate like a single payer program. They get their money from government, just like if they were a single payer program. And just like a single payer program, they set up so many rules and standards and regulations that even patients that doctors wanted to test would be rejected. Here's Dr. Todd Island. He's an infectious disease specialist with ABC News, laying out the details.
The CDC has changed its guidance from a more narrow criteria where we're testing the sicker patients who didn't have the flu and didn't have the other respiratory viruses, and also those contact tracing, meaning if you were exposed to someone with confirmed COVID-19 and then developed symptoms, those were the individuals that the state would say, okay, send us their tests. But most people that we wanted testing on did not fall into those categories, and they could not accept these tests.
Got it? They're only testing an incredibly narrow subsection of suspected cases, along, of course, with anyone on the Utah Jazz, apparently. So we know testing wasn't going very well until very recently. So what happened very recently?
Okay, so there's no question that still the demand for testing far exceeds the lab's capacity to test. But there is a silver lining. Up until a few days ago, the state labs were the only labs that could test. And what's happening now is that the private sector has gotten involved.
Oh, the private sector. I've heard of them. It's so strange how that happens. But as AOC might say if she was here and could speak coherently through the Chardonnay, but what about South Korea? Good question. And have another carafe. Why did South Korea do so much better? Because unlike us, they embraced their private sector very early. And that is how they were able to get testing set up quickly and make it widely available. They have now tested over 222,000 people. And while the problem has been significant, they have been able to bend the curve the right way. They also use levels of surveillance that would be completely unconstitutional here, along with a very tight border policy that would have AOC crying concentration camps to any camera available. If AOC were here, she'd likely point out that, see, single payer health care make good decision, or something like that. I wouldn't be able to understand necessarily through the wine breath. Then she'd belch up some rosé. It's not to say that government health care can't make a good decision. It's just in this case, their good decision was not to use government. In other words, every part of AOC's tweet was incredibly stupid, just like every other thought she has ever had. Remember, kids, alcohol kills brain cells.